Miriam Tellez had been at Hartwell and Crane for 3 years, long enough to know that Tuesday morning partner meetings were usually about billing, targets, or a client who had gone quiet. She arrived at conference room B at 8:55 with a yellow legal pad and the assumption that the next hour would be unremarkable. Calvin Osei was already there. He was seated at the far end of the long table, a neat manila folder in front of him, his hands resting flat on either side of it. He was 61 years old, a senior litigation partner, 22 years at the bar, the kind of attorney whose calm in a room had a quality to it. Not indifference, but the composure of a man who had sat in a great many rooms and had learned somewhere along the way that the room almost never deserved panic. He nodded to Miriam when she came in. She took her seat near the door, opened the legal pad, and uncapped her pen. Douglas Crane entered 2 minutes later with the firm's HR director, a woman named Sheila, and a man Miriam did not recognize. She would learn later that he was outside counsel, brought in that morning. Crane was the firm's managing partner. 64, silver-haired, with the manner of a man who had spent decades being the most important person in whatever room he entered and had stopped noticing, he assumed it. He set a document on the table in front of him. He did not sit immediately. "Calvin," he said, "thank you for coming in." It was said the way people say thank you when they mean something else. "Of course," Calvin said. Crane sat. He folded his hands on top of the document. "We've received a complaint," he said. "An anonymous internal complaint, filed through the firm's ethics portal. It raises questions about the provenance of your bar admission credentials, 2003 certificate of admission specifically." Miriam's pen stopped moving. She looked at Calvin. His expression did not change. He looked at Crane, the way a man looks at a claim he has already assessed and found to be wrong, and is deciding how much patience to extend to the person making it. "I understand," Calvin said. "We're not making any accusations," Crane said, in the tone people use when they are making exactly that. "But given the complaint, we're required to conduct a review. We'll need you to walk us through your credentialing documentation." "I brought it," Calvin said. He opened the manila folder. He placed items on the table, one at a time, with the unhurried precision of a man who had been expecting this, or something like it, for longer than the meeting had been scheduled. The original certificate of admission from the State Bar, dated March 2003, the annual registration renewals, each year through the present, in a paper-clipped stack, a copy of his law school diploma, the letter from the bar's Character and Fitness Committee, 6 printed pages from the State Bar's online attorney directory, showing his complete record of good standing. He placed each item on the table and left it there, facing Crane. Crane looked at the documents. He passed the certificate to Sheila without comment. Sheila examined it. The outside counsel examined it. "The complaint," Crane said, not looking up from the certificate, "specifically questions whether the issuing signature is authentic. There have been cases in other jurisdictions of credential fraud. We're obligated to follow up." Miriam wrote nothing on her legal pad. She sat very still. Calvin said, "Member of the Character and Fitness Committee signed my certificate. I can tell you her name, if that's helpful. She was the committee chair in 2003. She's now on the state Supreme Court." A brief quiet. "We'll verify that through our own process," Crane said. "Of course," Calvin said. "That's reasonable." He paused. "I do have one procedural question." Crane looked up. "The firm's partnership agreement," Calvin said. "Section 14, paragraph 3, specifies that any formal credential challenge against a named partner requires sign-off from the firm's general counsel before the review is opened. Has Patricia been notified?" The outside counsel's pen stopped. He looked at Crane. Sheila looked at Crane. Crane said, "This is a preliminary inquiry. Section 14 doesn't distinguish between preliminary and formal," Calvin said. His voice had not changed register once in the previous 8 minutes. "I'm not raising it to obstruct the process. I'm raising it because if Patricia hasn't been notified, then this meeting may not be properly constituted, and anything produced here could create complications for the firm. I'd rather we do it correctly." The outside counsel wrote something on his own pad and slid it across the table to Crane. Miriam could not see what it said. Crane said, "We'll take a brief recess." "Of course," Calvin said. "While we wait, there's one more thing I'd suggest, and it would take about 40 seconds. He turned his laptop to face the center of the table. The State Bar's public attorney directory was already open. My bar number is there on the registration form. If someone types it in, the system returns a full record. Date of admission, standing status, any complaints, any discipline. It's a public database. It's updated in real time. No one moved for a moment. Then Sheila typed. The screen returned Calvin Osie's record in the time it takes a page to load. It admitted March 2003, 22 consecutive years of good standing, 0 disciplinary actions, 0 complaints. A distinguished service commendation from the State Bar's Pro Bono Program, 2019. 6 published appellate opinions in which his brief arguments were cited by the court. The room was quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. Crane looked at the screen. He looked at it for a long time. Calvin closed his laptop. He gathered his documents from the table and returned them to the manila folder. One at a time, in the same order he had placed them. He set the folder in front of him and rested his hands on it. "I'd like Patricia in the room before we continue," he said, "for the firm's protection." Patricia Holt, the firm's general counsel, arrived 14 minutes later. She had not known about the meeting. That fact, Miriam would later understand, was the fulcrum on which everything else turned. Patricia sat down, read the complaint on Crane's tablet, looked at the bar directory screen still open on Sheila's laptop, and asked 2 questions. The first was directed at Sheila. Had the complaint been run through the ethics portal's standard source verification process before the meeting was called? It had not. The second was directed at Douglas Crane, and it was quieter than the first. Why not? The review of Calvin Osie's credentials was closed that afternoon. A separate HR investigation opened the following morning into the anonymous complaint itself, which the portal's metadata, once examined, traced to a specific device on the firm's network. It belonged to a third-year associate named Tyler Greaves, who had been passed over for a senior associate position 8 months earlier. Recommendation against his promotion had been made by Calvin, based on a pattern of missed deadlines and a big discrepancy that had never been satisfactorily explained. That review ran for 26 days and concluded with the associate's departure from the firm. Douglas Crane sent Calvin a written apology. It was formal, measured, and specific, drafted with Patricia's guidance and reviewed by outside counsel. It acknowledged that the credential review had been opened without the required GC notification, that the underlying complaint had not been properly vetted before the meeting was called, and that the process had been handled in a manner that did not reflect the firm's stated values. Crane signed it. A copy went into Calvin's personnel file per his request. The firm's partner review protocol was rewritten within 30 days. The new language required general counsel's sign-off, complaint source verification, and a 24-hour notice period for any named partner before any credentials review could be opened. First, the procedure was circulated to all partners and filed with the firm's ethics compliance record. Tellez submitted the note she had taken in Conference Room B as part of the HR investigation record. She had not written much on the legal pad, mostly dates and times, the procedural question about Section 14, the bar number typed into the public directory. But she had written one thing, near the bottom of the first page, that was not part of the record. She had written it while the screen was loading, and the room was quiet, and Calvin Osie was sitting with his hands resting on his folder, waiting for the truth to do what it always does when you give it the room. The note said, he knew exactly what that screen would show. He had always known. On the Thursday of the following week, Calvin Osie walked into Conference Room C to open arguments in a mock trial workshop for the firm's first-year associates. He set his folder on the table, looked at the 12 young faces looking back at him, and said, in the same register he used for everything, "The most important thing you'll ever do in a courtroom is know your record cold. Know it. Better than anyone who might question it. Not because you'll be questioned, but because the day you are, you want to answer from solid ground." He opened the folder, he began.